Sarah and Michael Bennett had been married for 8 years. They lived in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, in a blue house with white shutters. Michael worked as an engineer at a local company, while Sarah taught third grade at the elementary school. They had a good life, but something was missing. For 5 years, they tried to have a baby. They went to doctors, took medicines, and tried special treatments. Nothing worked. Every month, Sarah cried when she found out she wasn't pregnant. Maybe we should think about adoption, Michael suggested one evening as they sat on their porch swing. Sarah nodded slowly. I think I'm ready for that. They contacted an adoption agency the next day. The process was long and detailed. They had to fill out many forms, talk to social workers, and prepare their home for a child. After months of waiting, they got a call that changed their lives. We have a newborn girl who needs a family, the adoption worker named Linda told them. She's African American. Would you be interested in meeting her? Sarah's heart raced. Yes, she said without hesitation. Michael squeezed her hand in agreement. 2 days later, they drove to the hospital. Their hands shook as they walked down the hallway to the nursery. Linda met them at the door. She's right over here, Linda said, leading them to a small crib. Inside was a tiny baby with dark curly hair and beautiful brown skin. She was sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. This is Zoe, Linda told them. She's 3 days old. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She's perfect, she whispered. Michael reached down and gently touched Zoe's hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb, and his eyes filled with tears too. Can I hold her? Sarah asked. The nurse carefully picked up Zoe and placed her in Sarah's arms. The baby opened her eyes, dark and curious, and looked up at Sarah. Hi, Zoe, Sarah said softly. We're going to be your family. The next few weeks were busy and exciting. Sarah and Michael prepared the nursery, buying a white crib, soft blankets, and colorful toys. They painted the walls light yellow and hung pictures of animals on the walls. They'd also read books about transracial adoption and talk to other families who had adopted children of different races. They wanted to make sure they did everything right for Zoe. We need to honor her heritage, Michael said. We can't just pretend she's the same as us. Sarah agreed. We'll make sure she knows about her background and culture. When they finally brought Zoe home, their families came to welcome her. Michael's parents, John and Mary, brought stuffed animals. Sarah's sister, Julie, brought tiny dresses. She's beautiful, Mary said, holding Zoe carefully. Not everyone was as supportive. Some neighbors looked surprised when they saw Sarah walking with Zoe in her stroller. A woman at the grocery store asked, "Is she really yours?" Sarah answered politely but felt hurt. She hadn't expected these reactions. At night, when Zoe was sleeping, Sarah and Michael would stand over her crib and watch her. I already love her so much, Sarah said. Me too, Michael replied. It feels like she was always meant to be ours. They didn't know then how complicated their journey would become. They didn't know the surprises waiting for them in the future. For now, they were simply a new family, learning to love each other day by day. 5 years passed quickly. Zoe grew from a tiny baby into a smart, energetic kindergartner with bright eyes and a big smile. She loved to draw pictures, play with her dolls, and dance around the living room to music. Sarah and Michael tried their best to be good parents. They hung pictures of famous Black Americans on Zoe's bedroom walls. They bought her books with characters who looked like her. On weekends, they sometimes drove to Columbus to visit areas with more diverse populations. We want you to know about all parts of who you are, Sarah had explained to Zoe one day as they looked at a children's book about Harriet Tubman. Zoe nodded, though she didn't fully understand yet. She was still young. One Saturday morning, the family went to a park in their neighborhood. While Zoe played on the swings, Sarah sat on a bench nearby. Another mother sat down beside her. Your daughter is adorable, the woman said. Where is she from? Sarah had heard this question many times. People often assumed Zoe was adopted from another country. She was born here in Ohio, Sarah answered politely. Oh, the woman looked surprised. And you've had her since birth? Yes, we adopted her as a newborn. The woman smiled, but Sarah could see the curiosity in her eyes. These conversations always made Sarah feel uncomfortable. She wanted people to see them as just a normal family. Later that day, Michael took Zoe for ice cream. As they sat at a small table, an elderly man walked by and stared at them. "Is that your daddy?" he asked Zoe directly. Zoe looked up from her chocolate cone. "Yes," she said simply. The man walked away, shaking his head slightly. Michael felt a mix of anger and sadness. He knew these situations would only get more common as Zoe grew older. He worried about how they would affect her. At home that evening, while Zoe was taking a bath, Michael talked to Sarah about what happened. "We need to prepare her better for these questions," he said. "She's going to face them all her life." Sarah nodded. "I found a support group for families like ours. They meet twice a month at the community center. Maybe we should go." The next week, they attended their first meeting. There were 6 other families with children of different races. Some of the kids were older than Zoe, while others were younger. The parents shared stories and advice while the children played together. "It's so nice to see Zoe with kids who have similar experiences," Sarah whispered to Michael. They met a couple named David and Lisa who had 2 adopted children, an 8-year-old black son and a 6-year-old Asian daughter. "The questions never stop," Lisa told them, "but we found ways to help our kids handle them." David nodded. "The most important thing is to talk openly about race and adoption from an early age." Sarah and Michael took this advice seriously. They started having more direct conversations with Zoe about her adoption. They used simple words and answered her questions honestly. "Why don't I look like you and Daddy?" Zoe asked one night during bedtime. "Because you grew in another woman's tummy," Sarah explained. "But you grew in our hearts too. Families don't have to match on the outside to belong together." Zoe seemed satisfied with this answer, but Sarah knew harder questions would come as she got older. As Zoe's 6th birthday approached, Michael suggested they should try to learn more about her birth parents. The adoption was closed, but maybe we could at least get some medical history, he said. Sarah agreed. "I want her to have as many answers as possible when she starts asking more questions." They didn't know that their search for information would lead to a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about their family. When Zoe turned 7, Sarah and Michael enrolled her in a new elementary school. Cedar Ridge Elementary was known for its diverse student body and excellent programs. On the first day, Sarah walked Zoe to her 2nd grade classroom. "I'm nervous, Mom," Zoe whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand tightly. "That's normal, sweetie. You'll make friends soon," Sarah assured her. Ms. Wilson, a young teacher with friendly eyes, welcomed Zoe to the class. "We're so happy to have you join us," she said, showing Zoe to a desk next to a girl with long braids. The first few weeks went well. Zoe liked her teacher and made a few friends. She especially enjoyed art class and the after-school dance program. But one day, she came home quieter than usual. "Did something happen at school?" Michael asked as he helped her with homework. Zoe looked down at her paper. "Jasmine asked why I don't look like you and Mom. She said real families look alike." Michael felt a sharp pain in his chest. He and Sarah had prepared for this moment, but it still hurt to see Zoe upset. "Families come in all different ways," he explained gently. "Some children grow in their mom's tummy, and some, like you, grow in someone else's tummy but become part of another family. That doesn't make our family any less real." Zoe nodded, but her eyes still showed confusion. That night, Sarah and Michael talked in low voices after Zoe went to bed. "I think it's time we reached out to that cultural connection program," Sarah suggested, the one Lisa and David mentioned. The program connected transracial adoptive families with mentors from the child's cultural background. The following weekend, they met with the program coordinator, a woman named Tanya. "Children need to see people who look like them in positive roles," Tanya explained. "It helps them build a healthy identity." Through the program, Zoe was matched with Keisha, a black college student who studied elementary education. Keisha visited twice a month, taking Zoe to cultural events, helping her learn how to care for her hair, and simply spending time with her. "I like Keisha," Zoe told her parents after their 3rd meeting. "She has hair like mine, and she knows how to make the best braids." Sarah felt both grateful and a little sad. There were things she couldn't teach Zoe, experiences she couldn't share, but she was thankful for Keisha's help. As 2nd grade continued, Zoe faced more questions from classmates. Some were innocent, but others were hurtful. During a parent-teacher conference, Ms. Wilson mentioned some concerns. Zoe seems to be struggling with some identity issues, she said. Yesterday during family drawing time, she colored herself the same light color as you and Michael. Sarah and Michael exchanged worried glances. We've noticed some changes at home too, Sarah admitted. She's been asking more questions about her birth parents. Ms. Wilson suggested they consider talking to the school counselor. Mrs. Taylor has experience working with adopted children. The following week, Zoe began meeting with Mrs. Taylor once a week. The counselor used games and art to help Zoe express her feelings about being adopted. After one session, Mrs. Taylor spoke privately with Sarah and Michael. Zoe is struggling to understand why her birth mother didn't keep her, she explained. This is common for adopted children her age. They start to process feelings of abandonment. What can we do? Michael asked, his voice tight with concern. Keep talking openly about adoption. Answer her questions honestly, but at a level she can understand. And consider creating a life book, a special album that tells her adoption story. Sarah and Michael spent a weekend creating Zoe's life book. They included photos of her as a newborn, pictures of their first days together, and empty pages for the parts of her story they didn't know. Someday, we might be able to fill in more details, Sarah told Zoe as they looked through the book together. She had no idea how soon those empty pages would begin to fill with surprising information that would change their family forever. When Zoe turned 9, Sarah developed a new interest in family history. It started when her cousin Beth sent her old photos of their grandparents. I wish we had more information about our family tree, Sarah told Michael one evening. It would be nice for Zoe to know about her adoptive family's background, too. Michael nodded. My mom always said we had relatives who came from Ireland, but I don't know much beyond that. Sarah started researching online and found a popular DNA testing company. What if we all did these tests? She suggested, showing Michael the website. It might be fun to learn about our ancestry. Do you think it's a good idea for Zoe? Michael asked, looking concerned. I think so. The counselor said it's important for her to understand both her birth heritage and her adoptive family's history. This could help with that. They discussed it with Zoe, explaining in simple terms how the test worked. Will it tell me about my birth parents? Zoe asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. It won't tell us exactly who they are, Sarah explained carefully, but it might show what parts of the world your ancestors came from. Zoe seemed excited about this. Can we do it now? The next day, Sarah ordered 3 testing kits. When they arrived a week later, they each spit into small tubes and mailed them back to the company. The website said results would take about 6 weeks. Life continued as normal. Zoe started 4th grade and joined a basketball team. Sarah volunteered at the school library, and Michael received a promotion at work. They almost forgot about the DNA tests until the email arrived. The results are ready. Sarah called out one Saturday morning. The family gathered around the computer as she logged into the website. Sarah's results came first. Look, I'm mostly German and English, with some Scottish. That matches what Grandma always told us. Next, they checked Zoe's results. As expected, her heritage was primarily African, with roots in West Africa. Now let's look at Dad's, Sarah said, clicking on Michael's profile. As they read his results, the room grew quiet. Michael was mostly Irish and English, as expected, but there was something else. A small percentage, about 8%, showed African ancestry. That can't be right, Michael said, squinting at the screen. There must be a mistake. Sarah read through the information again. It says this likely comes from an ancestor about 3 to 4 generations back. They looked at each other in confusion. Maybe the test is wrong, Michael suggested. The next day, Sarah called the testing company. A customer service representative explained that while no test was perfect, their accuracy rate was very high. Sometimes family histories contain surprises, the woman said. You might consider looking into your genealogy more deeply. Michael called his mother that evening. Mom, did you know anything about us having African American ancestors? He asked hesitantly. His mother was silent for a long moment. Why do you ask, dear? Michael explained about the DNA test. There was another long pause. There was something your grandmother once mentioned, she finally said. About her grandmother, my great-grandmother. There were rumors she was mixed race, but the family never talked about it. It was a different time then. Michael sat down, feeling stunned. Why didn't you ever tell me? I honestly didn't know if it was true, his mother replied. And it didn't seem important. When Michael shared this conversation with Sarah, they both realized what it meant. Their adopted daughter shared a biological connection with Michael's family. It was a small connection, a distant ancestor, but it was real. Should we tell Zoe? Sarah asked. I think we should, Michael replied. But carefully, she's still young. That night, they sat with Zoe in the living room. Michael explained in simple terms that the test had shown something surprising, that he had an African-American great-great-great-grandmother. So that means we're actually related? Zoe asked, looking confused but interested. In a small way, yes, Sarah said. You and Dad share a distant ancestor. Zoe thought about this for a moment. Then she smiled and hugged Michael. That's cool, she said. But this discovery was just the beginning of what the DNA test would reveal to the Bennett family. The weeks following their DNA discovery were strange for the Bennett family. Michael spent hours researching his family history, trying to identify his African-American ancestor. He found old photos in his parents' attic and studied faces for clues he might have missed before. I think it might be this woman, he told Sarah one night, showing her a faded photograph of a stern-looking woman in Victorian-era clothing. My great-great-grandmother Elizabeth, there's something about her features? Sarah nodded, seeing what Michael meant. Have you told your parents more about what we found? Michael sighed. Dad doesn't want to talk about it. Mom seems curious but uncomfortable. Sarah understood their reaction. Michael's parents were in their 70s and had grown up in a different time. Finding out their family wasn't exactly who they thought they were had been unsettling for them. For Zoe, the news had created confusion. One evening, as Sarah helped her with homework, Zoe suddenly asked, If Dad and I are related, does that mean I'm not adopted anymore? Sarah put down the pencil she was holding. You're still adopted, honey. The biological connection is very small and from a long time ago. It doesn't change how you came into our family. Zoe frowned. But at school, when we learned about family trees, Ms. Wilson said adopted kids have two families, their birth family and their adoptive family. Now it seems like I have three families. Sarah hadn't thought about it that way. I guess that's true. It is a bit complicated. Am I black, or am I mixed like Dad? Zoe asked next. Sarah chose her words carefully. You're black. Dad has a very small amount of African ancestry from many generations ago, but that doesn't change who he is, and it doesn't change who you are either. Zoe seemed to accept this answer, but Sarah could tell she was still processing everything. That weekend, they attended their support group for transracial adoptive families. They hadn't planned to share their discovery, but during the discussion, Zoe raised her hand. My dad and I took a DNA test, and we found out we're related, she announced to the group. The room fell silent. Other parents exchanged glances. Then Lisa, one of the regular members, spoke gently. That must have been surprising for your family, Zoe. How do you feel about it? Zoe thought for a moment. Confused, but also kind of special. After the meeting, several parents approached Sarah and Michael with questions. No one had experienced anything similar. How are you handling this with Zoe? One mother asked. We're trying to be honest without overcomplicating things, Sarah explained. But honestly, we're figuring it out as we go. The next day, Sarah received a call from Zoe's school. Mrs. Taylor, the counselor, wanted to meet with them. Zoe shared some interesting information during our session today. Mrs. Taylor explained when Sarah and Michael arrived. She seems to be struggling with how this new information fits into her understanding of herself and your family. We're all struggling with that, Michael admitted. Mrs. Taylor nodded sympathetically. Children Zoe's age are developing their identity. For adopted children, especially transracial adoptees, that process is already more complex. This adds another layer. What should we do? Sarah asked. Keep the conversation open. Remind her that families come in all forms, and that this connection doesn't change the fact that she was adopted into your family. And consider consulting with a therapist who specializes in adoption issues. On the drive home, Michael was quiet. Finally, he spoke. I keep thinking about Zoe's birth mother. I wonder if she knew about any connection to a white family. Sarah looked out the window. I doubt it. The adoption agency didn't mention anything like that. Maybe we should try to find more information about her birth family, Michael suggested. Not to contact them necessarily, but just so Zoe has a more complete picture. Sarah hesitated. The adoption was closed. I'm not sure if that's possible. We could at least ask, Michael said. For Zoe's sake. Neither of them realized that this decision would lead to the most shocking discovery yet. 2 months after their DNA discovery, Sarah contacted the adoption agency that had helped them adopt Zoe. The original agency had closed, but their records had been transferred to a larger organization in Columbus. I understand this was a closed adoption, Sarah explained to the woman on the phone, but we discovered some unexpected information through DNA testing. We're wondering if there's any way to learn more about Zoe's birth family. The woman, Ms. Parker, was sympathetic but firm. Closed adoptions are legally binding. We can't share identifying information about the birth parents without their consent. We don't need names or addresses, Sarah clarified. Just some background information that might help Zoe understand her history better. After some discussion, Ms. Parker agreed to review Zoe's file. I can check if there's any non-identifying information that wasn't shared with you initially. I'll call you back next week. The wait felt long. Sarah and Michael tried not to get their hopes up, but they couldn't help imagining what they might learn. Meanwhile, their DNA results had been uploaded to the testing company's database, which could match them with genetic relatives who had also taken the test. One evening, Sarah checked the website and found something new. Michael, look at this, she called. The system found a match for Zoe. Someone who appears to be a close relative, possibly a first cousin. Michael hurried to look at the screen. The match was for someone named Tamika Johnson. According to the site, she shared enough DNA with Zoe to be a first cousin or similar relation. There's a message feature, Sarah said. Should we contact her? They discussed it carefully and decided to send a simple message explaining who they were and asking if Tamika would be willing to communicate with them. They were careful not to pressure her, making it clear that they respected whatever decision she made. 3 days later, Tamika replied, I think I know who Zoe's birth mother is. She's my cousin Janelle. She had a baby when she was very young and placed her for adoption. Would you be open to talking by phone? Sarah and Michael were both nervous and excited. They hadn't expected such a direct connection so quickly. After exchanging phone numbers, they arranged a call for the following evening after Zoe was in bed. When the phone rang, Sarah answered with shaking hands. She put it on speaker so Michael could hear. Hello, came a woman's voice. This is Tamika. Thank you for calling, Sarah said. We really appreciate it. This is a strange situation, Tamika said. Her voice was warm but cautious. When I saw the DNA match, I was surprised. My cousin Janelle had a baby girl about 9 years ago when she was just 17. The timing matches with your daughter's age. Yes, Zoe is 9, Michael confirmed. Janelle was very young and not ready to be a mother, Tamika continued. Her parents, my aunt and uncle, helped her make the adoption plan. It was a difficult decision, but she wanted her baby to have opportunities she couldn't provide. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. We've always been grateful to Zoe's birth mother for her sacrifice. There's something else you should know, Tamika said, her voice getting more serious. Janelle's father, my Uncle Richard, is mixed race. His father was a white man named William Bennett. Sarah and Michael looked at each other in shock. Did you say Bennett? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, William Bennett was from a small town near Columbus. He and my grandmother had a relationship in the 1960s. It wasn't accepted back then, so they kept it secret. When she got pregnant, he provided financial support but stayed married to his white wife. Michael could hardly breathe. My grandfather was named William Bennett. He lived outside Columbus his whole life. There was silence on the phone. Then Tamika spoke slowly. Are you saying your grandfather might be the same William Bennett who was my great-grandfather? It seems possible, Michael said. The room seemed to spin around him. If that's true, Sarah said quietly, then Zoe's birth family and our family are connected. This is unbelievable, Tamika whispered. None of them had expected this revelation. What had begun as a simple DNA test had uncovered a family secret spanning generations. The revelation about William Bennett changed everything. In the days following their conversation with Tamika, Sarah and Michael struggled to process what they had learned. If Michael's grandfather was the same William Bennett who had fathered Richard, Janelle's father, then Michael and Janelle were actually second cousins. And that meant Zoe had been adopted by her biological father's second cousin. It's like something from a movie, Sarah said one night as they sat at the kitchen table after Zoe had gone to bed. How do we even explain this to her? Michael stared at his coffee cup. I need to confirm it first. I need to know if my grandfather really is the same man. Michael called his mother the next day and asked more questions about his grandfather. She told him that William had indeed worked in Columbus for many years and had often traveled for business. There were rumors about Dad, she admitted reluctantly. Your grandmother once found receipts for an apartment he paid for on the east side of Columbus. When she confronted him, he said it was for a colleague who needed help. She never fully believed him. Michael shared this information with Tamika, who then spoke with her grandmother, the woman who had been involved with William Bennett. Slowly, they pieced together the story. The dates, locations, and details matched. There was little doubt they were talking about the same man. I'd like to meet Janelle, Michael told Sarah after confirming the connection. If she's willing. Sarah nodded. What about Zoe? When do we tell her? Not yet, Michael decided. Let's meet Janelle first. This is too much for a 9-year-old to understand all at once. Tamika arranged a meeting at a quiet restaurant halfway between their homes. Sarah and Michael arrived early, their hearts racing with nervousness. When Janelle walked in, they immediately saw Zoe in her face, the same shaped eyes, the same smile. She was young, only 26, and looked nervous too. Thank you for meeting us, Sarah said as they sat down. Janelle nodded, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. I never thought I'd meet you. When I placed my baby for adoption, I thought that part of my life was closed forever. We've always respected your decision, Michael said gently. Zoe is wonderful, and we're so grateful to you. Tears formed in Janelle's eyes. Is she happy? Is she healthy? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Janelle some recent photos of Zoe playing basketball at her school concert, baking cookies in their kitchen. She's beautiful, Janelle whispered, touching the screen gently. She looks like my dad. That's what we wanted to talk to you about, Michael said carefully. He explained what they had discovered about William Bennett and the family connection. Janelle listened in amazement. So you're saying you're actually my distant cousin? And my daughter was adopted by her own relatives without anyone knowing? It seems that way, Sarah confirmed. It's still hard for us to believe. Janelle shook her head, a small smile forming. My dad always said our family was complicated, but this is beyond anything he could have imagined. Over the next 2 hours, they talked about their lives, filling in blanks and making connections. Janelle had finished high school after giving birth and was now in college studying nursing. She had always wondered about her daughter but had been too afraid to seek information. I was so young when I got pregnant, she explained. My parents helped me make the decision to place her for adoption. They thought it was best for everyone. Would you be open to meeting Zoe someday? Sarah asked cautiously. Janelle's eyes widened. I would love that, but only if she wants to meet me, and only when you think she's ready. As they prepared to leave, Janelle hesitated, then asked, What does she know about me? Very little, Michael admitted. The adoption agency didn't provide much information, but we've always spoken positively about you and told her you made your decision out of love. Janelle wiped away a tear. Thank you for that. On the drive home, Sarah and Michael were quiet, each lost in thought about how this new relationship would affect their family, especially Zoe. This changes everything, Sarah finally said, but maybe in a good way. Michael nodded. Now we just need to figure out how to tell our daughter that her adoption story is even more extraordinary than we ever imagined. 1 week after meeting Janelle, Sarah and Michael decided it was time to talk to Zoe. They chose a Saturday morning when they would have the whole day together. After breakfast, they sat with Zoe in the living room. Remember how we took those DNA tests? Sarah began gently. And we found out that Dad has a distant African-American ancestor. Zoe nodded. You said that's why Dad and I are a tiny bit related. That's right, Michael said. But we've learned something else that's very surprising. They had practiced how to explain this in simple terms. Michael continued. We found out that my grandfather William had another family that nobody knew about. Zoe looked confused. Another family? Like other kids? Yes, Sarah explained. and one of those children had a daughter named Janelle. Janelle is your birth mother. Zoe's eyes widened. She sat very still, trying to understand. So, my birth mom is related to Dad? She is, Michael confirmed. She's my distant cousin. We didn't know this when we adopted you. Nobody knew. Zoe frowned, thinking hard. Does that mean I wasn't really adopted? You were definitely adopted, Sarah assured her. We didn't know about this connection when you were born. It's just a very special coincidence that we discovered later. Zoe was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, Does my birth mom know about this? Yes, Michael said. We met her last week. Her name is Janelle, and she's a very nice person. She was very young when you were born, just a teenager. Did you show her my picture? Zoe asked. Sarah nodded. We did. She thought you were beautiful and was very happy to hear that you're doing well. Would you like to meet her someday? Michael asked carefully. Zoe thought about this. Maybe, not yet, but maybe someday. They talked for almost an hour, answering Zoe's questions as honestly as they could. Some things were hard to explain to a 9-year-old, but they did their best. When Zoe finally went outside to ride her bike, Sarah and Michael felt relieved that the conversation had gone well. Over the next few months, their families began to connect. Tamika visited with her children, who were close to Zoe's age. Janelle's parents, Richard and Karen, came for dinner one evening. It was awkward at first, but as they shared stories and found common interests, the tension eased. It's like discovering a whole new branch of our family tree, Michael told his mother, who had finally become more accepting of the situation. By the time Zoe turned 10, she felt ready to meet Janelle. They arranged a meeting at a park with a playground, keeping it casual and low pressure. When Janelle arrived, Zoe was suddenly shy, hiding behind Sarah, but Janelle was patient. She sat on a bench and talked with Sarah and Michael while Zoe watched from a distance. Eventually, Zoe's curiosity overcame her nervousness. She approached slowly and sat beside Janelle. I like your braids, Janelle said with a smile. Thanks, Zoe replied. Keisha taught me how to do them. She's my mentor. That's cool, Janelle said. When I was your age, my mom used to braid my hair every Sunday night for school. Slowly, Zoe began to ask Janelle questions about her favorite colors, foods, and books. By the end of their meeting, Zoe was more relaxed, even laughing at Janelle's jokes. As years passed, their unusual family continued to grow and develop. Zoe maintained relationships with both the Bennetts and Janelle's family. She had cousins, aunts, and uncles from both sides who loved her. When Zoe was 13, she wrote an essay for school titled My Family Story. It began, Most people think families should all look alike, but mine is different. My story started with an adoption, continued with a DNA test, and became something no one could have imagined. Sarah and Michael kept this essay in a special place. It reminded them that families could be formed in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the most surprising discoveries could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The Bennett family's journey wasn't what anyone had planned, but it had brought healing and connection across generations, bridging gaps that once seemed impossible to close.